is said, or to this we say, idam tavat parikshyatam. So we go on from here. Should I be recording this? I forgot what the situation is. Maybe, I think Charlene is not here and probably would like us to record.
Recording in progress.
I can record and I'll turn that on.
I should probably also record.
I was anticipating that. Yes, I have, I think, turned that option on for you too.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right. So who would like to?
May I also,
Yes.
I ask to give me this option as well.
Okay.
please?
Yes. Sure,
Thanks.
George. Did I succeed? I think.
Yes.
Okay. And a hand was raised.
Dave has been no. Dave he's away from the mic, which is why I'm speaking first. He depending on others, he's been trying to read and translate for the last couple of classes, and somehow he never got a chance.
All right. Well, please.
Okay, come closer to the mic. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you sit? Otherwise, stand. All right. Go.
उच्यते इदं तावत् परीक्ष्यताम् यदेतत् प्रत्यक्ष विज्ञानं नीलमिदं पीतमिदम् इत्युत्पद्यते तत्र किमेक आकारः प्रकाशते उत द्वितीयम् इति. So here in uchyate, in response, idam tavat parikshatam, thus this should be examined, yat etat pratyaksha vijnanam, that is this direct perception, neelam idam pitam idam, this is blue, this is yellow, iti utpadyate, this arises, tatra kim ek आकारः प्रकाशते उत द्वितीयम् इति. So there is there one shape that is known, or are there two shapes that are known?
Okay, very good. Uchte, it is replied. Idam tavat parikshatam. I think you said, thus this should be should be examined. I think that it's not quite literal or quite exact.
Okay.
More or less okay, of course. But there is no word here that I think naturally means thus. I'm not sure if thus was meant to translate idam or was it meant to translate tavat.
Tavat.
Yeah. All right. Well, somehow thus is more itam or evam, for instance. A few other possibilities are there in Sanskrit. Tavat, I think I've discussed it recently, but I don't remember in which class. I repeat, sorry if for some it sounds a bit too familiar by now, but let me repeat it. When tavat occurs as an indeclinable, it can also occur, by the way, as a declined word, of which tavat would be the neuter first or second case, and tavan, for instance, would be the masculine first case. But when it is undeclined, as is the case here, Then there are two main functions which it has, especially in Shastra, but also elsewhere. It can mean, first of all, more or less. It can be expressive of sequence, of being the first in a sequence. Or it can mean, or it can have the flavor of obviously, or as everyone must surely agree. This latter function is called by several commentators, or when this latter function occurs, the word is called by several commentators a vipratipatya bhava dyotako nipataha, a particle nipataha that shows dyotaka. It doesn't express this, but it shows, it reveals or hints that. What does it hint? Vipratipatya bhava, the absence of any disagreement. Here, I think the most natural is to take tavat in the sense of sequence. So to start with, idam parikshitam, this, that is to say, vakshamanam, the following, what is going to be said, this should be examined, looked into deeply. The pronoun idam is very often pointing forward, as it is here. Okay, then we come to yad etad. All of this is, I suppose, from yad etad up to dvityam, is within quotation marks, so to speak. The quotation marks ended, of which the ending one is there sort of explicitly in the form of this iti. And these quotation marks are around basically what is referred to by idam. So the thing that should be looked into is this, namely the question. I supply the question. This etad, perceptual cognition that arises, which arises yad utpadyate, in the form is here a translation of iti, in the form nilam idam, this is blue, or we can supply or pitam idam, this is yellow. So these are examples of the linguistic form which perceptual cognitions can have, or the way that we could express in words a perceptual cognition. Tatra, now this tatra should be understood as related to, correlating with yad. Tatra is completely exchangeable in such cases, in cases such as this here, with tasmin. So tasmin pratyaksha vijnane, in this kind of a pratyaksha vijnana. Now the question is, kim eka akaraha prakashate? I notice you translated prakashate passively. Probably you were aware that it is not a passive, it's just a choice on the English side, so to speak. There's no great harm in making it passive. Still, I also don't see any benefit in it particularly. I might personally prefer to translate it actively, as it is in the Sanskrit. In it, in this cognition, does a single shape or form or aspect shine forth or appear? Or does a pair shine forth, prakashate, to be understood or continued? There's anuvritti of it, one might say, from the preceding clause. Okay, I think your translation was good. You had understood it, basically, without any problem. So these were just very tiny points if one wants to render it just a little bit more precisely. Good. Shall we go to the next? The next section.
May I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
So my question is about parikshitam. So is it pariksha plus ta, an abstract suffix?
No, it is not. If it were, then this form would have to be dvitiyantam and evidently feminine. But there is, to start with, no verb here or verbal form at all that could be transitive, that could require a direct object, a karma, which this word then could be, if it were indeed, pariksha plus ta, and then second case ending. So no, that is not the correct way to understand it. Instead, it is not a subanta form, it is a pinganta form. It is verbal more rather than nominal. And to be precise, it is the imperative, third person, singular, passive of parish. Now, the passive imperatives are quite common of use in Sanskrit, as you probably remember from earlier Sanskrit study. They often have a bit the feeling of a polite request, though gradations of politeness in Sanskrit are not so precise as they are in some other classical and even perhaps a few modern languages. Anyway, so in classical Sanskrit, we can say, if I want to say sit down, I can say upavisha, which is the second person imperative. Maybe this does have slightly a more rough feeling to it, a little bit more abrupt. Or I can say upavishatu bhavan, third person, active, perfectly polite, I would think. But what is rather common is to see a passive imperative instead, upavishyatam. Then the agent is usually not expressed by any word. Of course, if it is expressed, it would have to be tritiyanta with an instrumental third case ending. So here, idam parikshitam, idam is first case because it is agreeing with parikshitam, which is a karmani prayoga. Idam is actually, this is actually the object of the action of investigation. Literal translation, this should be looked into, passive. We can also translate it actively if we wish in English, no problem with that. Examine this first, or please examine this first, or consider this first. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's go to the next section, where I couldn't help slightly stumbling over the heading added by Kataoka. He adds dvitayakara avabhasa bhavaha, which I think is not entirely natural in classical Sanskrit. He should rather have written, in my view, akara dvitaya avabhasa bhavaha. Dvitaya means a pair, and it is not natural to make a compound dvitayakara in the sense of a pair of akaras. Dvitayakara would be the akara of the dvitaya. I think more natural here would be to say akara dvitaya. Anyway, that's not important since this is all purely added by the editor. We should just read yadi dvitayam avabhati and so forth.
Dvitaya is also found in the dictionary as twofold. Would it be possible to use it in that sense as an adjective rather than dvayam, for instance?
Well, it may be possible indeed, but I think that the usage is not common, or it's not normal, not very normal in classical Sanskrit. I think that here it is rather certain that dvitayam is being used as a neuter noun, both in what we just read, kim eka akaraha prakashati uta dvitayam. I think this is a neuter noun, and also yadi dvitayam avabhati. If it is not a noun but an adjective there, then for one thing, I think it is hard to account for why we should have a neuter form. If dvitaya meant twofold as an adjective, then the natural noun to be elided, the only natural noun to be elided would be akaraha, which is masculine. So
Right,
I believe we should really be clear that here dvitayam is a noun. And I think that the usage of it as an adjective is not very common, as I said, in classical Sanskrit. To me, it sounds quite unfamiliar, at least. Not what one would expect. I think what you'll find in the vast majority of cases is that dvitaya is used, as here, as a neuter noun. Okay, let's read the following. Anyone for this?
I can.
Yes, Ashwinathan.
Thank you. Okay. Yadi dvitayam avabhati ayamartho nilam idam tat jnanam iti tat kimatra vicharyate jitam bhavadbhihi jitasya yat apadyate tat asmasu vidhiyatam. Oh, if a pair avabhati, if a pair is perceived, and the pair is this, the first of the pair is ayam arthaha nilam. So this thing is this object or this thing is blue, and the second of the pair is idam tat jnanam. This is that knowledge, or this is the knowledge of that iti. Then kimatra vicharyate. I'm not very sure. Is it something like so? What should be? What is to be thought about here? Jitam bhavadbhihi. Uh, by you, it has been won, or so. I guess by you, the argument or has been won. Jitasya yat abadyate tad asmasu vidhiyatam. For or of the winner, also really like the yat apadyate, whatever it is that the winner is reaching, or whatever is reached or attained by the winner, that that should be prescribed or followed. Asmasu, I'm not sure what it's referring to because it's plural. So it does it mean among us? Among us, that should be among all of us. That should be followed. Not very sure, but roughly that's what it is. That so if two things or if a pair is perceived and the pair is this thing is blue and this is the knowledge of that, or this is that knowledge, then what is there to be thought about? By you, this is one, and that which is reached by the winner, or that position that is of the winner, that among us should be followed.
Yeah, good, thank you. So I go through it again. There are a few points where maybe your translation was not completely precise. Yadi dvitiyam avabhati, as you said, if like that again, like with Prakashte in Dave's translation of Prakashte, I think you made this one also passive in your translation. It's a big problem, but still, again, I don't see a particular advantage in making it passive. I think I would prefer to keep it active. If two things, if a pair appears, shines forth, namely thus, iti, and now we have again ways in which the two avabhasas or the two prakashas could be verbalized, expressed. One avabhasanam would be ayam artho nilam. This object is blue. Now, if I translate it that way, it sounds a little bit as if nila were an adjective. But since we have nilam, not nila, it seems that nilam is not being used as a qualifier, as an adjective of artha. Instead, it seems like it's used as a substantive, as a noun. So this thing is nilam, a patch of blue, or something like that.
Oh, I see.
And then the second one, idam tat jnanam, I think you repeatedly gave two possible translations of this. Basically, the difference being whether tat is taken in compound or as a separate word. I think of the two, it is more natural to take tat in compound. So on the one hand, here, this is the object and it is something blue. And on the other hand, this is the cognition of that object. If the two things both appear, if artha appears and artha jnana appears as well, and we can really kind of clearly separate them. I am artha idam jnana. If this is the case, then tat kim atra vicharyate. The expression might be just slightly ambiguous. Kim could possibly be taken here differently, namely as why. Why does one reflect? Is reflected here, but I think you're probably right that it's more natural to take kim not as why, but to take it as first case referring to the object, denoting the object of vichara. Object because vicharite is a passive form, karmani. So probably it needs something like, then what is deliberated on here? What more or less the flavor of what do we have to examine? What is there that is examined practically that needs to be examined? Examination over. No further examination is needed in such a case. Jitam bhavat bihi. You suggested something like, you have won the argument, or something like that. It's not bad, but if we add something like the argument in English, maybe this is the feeling as if chitam were a karmani passive too. I think though that chitam is meant as a bhavi passive. Remember again that G can be transitive or intransitive in Sanskrit. It's a verb which can be sakarmaka or akarmaka. We have discussed akarmaka usages, especially recently, several times, especially when they occur in Mangala verses. Now I forgot which particular one we might have recently seen, but probably you can remember some examples. I think, to me at least, it is natural to take chitam bhavat bihi simply as the bhave equivalent of bhavantaha ajayan. You have won, or you are victorious, with no object being expressed here, or even indeed, as in the Mangala verse context, you are supreme. You are on top. You rule. I don't think, for one thing, that there's a very natural noun that we can supply here, a neuter noun, to agree with chitam, as we would need if chitam were a karmani prayoga. So I would recommend understanding this as bhavi prayoga and not supplying any noun. Not you have won the argument, but just you have won, or you are victorious, or you come out on top. The fact that in the next we have jitasya as a karmani prayoga does not, I think, affect this point. Here the jitasya refers to a person. So I think that the usage there in any case is different from that in jitam bhavat bihi, where the neuter shows us that a person is not referred to, I think. Okay, anyway, much ado about very little. It doesn't matter so much, but if we want to be very precise, again, I would suggest that we should understand jitam as bhave, not karmani prayoga. Then the following jitasya, I think this one should be karmani. Jitasya yad apadyate tad asmasu vidhiyatam. You have felt this to be slightly difficult, it seemed to me. That which yet apadyate, it follows or it befalls it happens undesirably. There's a slight feeling, I think, often with this verb of undesirability. That which befalls willy-nilly, he may not want it, for the person who is conquered. Now, he doesn't spell out what this might be. In a battle between kings, what might befall the conquered person is, for instance, to be imprisoned, at least for some time, or some worse fate might sometimes befall that person. In a debate, of course, it might be different. Anyway, here, without specifying it, he says that which falls to the lot of the conquered, that asmasu vidhiyatam, the flavor is that should be done, vidhiyatam equals more or less kriyatam asmasu. It means asmad vishaye or mad vishaye. This is a vishya substitute. That should be done with reference to us, with regard to us, or simply to us. In other words, we could also paraphrase this last part with something like, please feel free to do to me, let's take the plural as for the singular, please free to do to me what is done to a conquered person. What is done to somebody who one has defeated in debate. Let's add in debate here. You can proclaim your victory, you can, I don't know, whatever it might be that in the particular societal, cultural context is done to the defeated one, let that be done. This is just some nice rhetorics, of course. Okay, so the Buddhist is saying we should first discuss or investigate, does one akara appear or do two? And then he says, let's take the second option first. If two appear, then all right, you've already won. And then, all right, I have to admit defeat. Go ahead in that case and do whatever is done to the defeated. But obviously, the Buddhist intends us to understand that he does not believe that we can convincingly claim that vidyam avabhati. This is not a realistic way, in the Buddhist's view, to describe our cognition of objects. Pratyaksha vijnana, we have simultaneously, or for that matter successively, well, if it's successively, then in any case it is not ekasmin pratyaksha vijnani. But certainly ekasmin pratyaksha vijnani, we do not have simultaneously two akaras appearing, the akara of artha and the akara of jnana. So we should consider the other possibility, and that is done in the next paragraph. So is this paragraph all right?
I have a bit of a question here. So when we say jitasya, there the jita is referring to the one who has been conquered, who's conquered, the one who's defeated, in other words. And when it is jitam bhavadbhihi, there it means it's referring to the person who has conquered or who won. Is that right?
Not quite. The word jitta does not refer to the person who has won. The word,
I see.
in my view, in jitam bhavadbhihi, the word jitta is denoting only the action. Now, compare, for instance, if this is still a little bit slippery in your mind, hard to grasp, compare the usage of gam. Gam is a verb which also can be either sakarmaka or akarmaka. So I can have a karmani passive. For instance, I can say, Gramo gato devadattena. The village is gone to by Devadatta. But it's equally good Sanskrit to have a non-transitive usage, in which case the passive has to be, since there is no karma, the passive has to be expressive of or denotive of only the action and not the object. There is, after all, no object. Perfectly good Sanskrit is to say, Gatam devadattena. And this has exactly the same meaning, basically, as Devadatto gachat. Devadattaha agachat. Without an object. Devadattaha agachat. Where is Devadattaha? Devadatta went. Devadatta has left. I can answer the question, Devadattaha kutra, however, also passively. I can say Devadattaha agachat, or I can say Katam Devadattena. They both mean Devadatta has gone. The action of going, non-transitively, has been performed by Devadatta. That's expressed by both sentences, the one with Kartari Prayoga Devadattaha agachat, and the one with Karmani Prayoga Katam Devadattena. By the way, of course, I can also say Kamyate Devadattena. Here, Jitam Bhavatbihi, I understand to be parallel to usages like Katam Devadattena. Katam Devadattena, Devadatta went, Jitam Bhavatbihi, you won, without an object.
One thing, according to the English, Ayamartho Ilam and the knowledge of that perception, it happens simultaneously or one by one?
The knowledge not of that perception, but rather you mean perhaps the, oh, well, I'm not sure what you mean, sorry. Okay, but if you are talking about this particular dvitiyam, the dvitiyam, ayam arto nilam and idam tasya nilasya artasya jnanam, I think what we are discussing here is whether these both occur simultaneously in a single cognition. And the Buddhists say, if that were the case, then all right, you win. You won or you win. The implication, though, of his saying so is that he thinks that his opponent cannot convincingly make this claim. So the Buddhist thinks rather that it's a bit absurd to say that when I cognize one thing, in that cognition of the object, there are simultaneously two forms that appear. Object form and cognition of object. So the Buddhist is going to suggest rather that it is only plausible that a single akara appears in cognition. And what is that akara? What is it an akara of? That we will discuss in the following. Okay, for the moment, yes, about this thing, this is a slightly tricky point. I think that we have here directly contiguous, or almost directly contiguous, with only one word between them. We have two occurrences of this kta form jita, but the occurrences are rather different. In jitasya, jita is referring to a person who has been defeated. And this form, although it is of course morphologically ambiguous, I think we should understand as masculine. Jitasya, this one is jitasya, purushasya, vadinaha, whatever, it refers to a masculine, a person. But jitam bhavatbihi, here jitam is neuter, and while jitasya is karmani prayoga, jitam, I believe, should be understood as bhave prayoga. So he uses the same word in two different ways, right next to each other almost. It can happen.
Thank you, that helps. Yes.
Okay, let's look at the next step. Ata ekaha eva. Yes, Ricardo, very good.
Especially because I found this to be a bit not too clear. Ataika eka evayamakara pratate tarhyasti vicharaavasaraha asyayamakaraha kimarthasya kim jnanasya iti sachaevam vicharimana akaro yadyartasyeti stasyati tad bhavanto jeshyanti jnanakara pakshetu vayam jeshyama iti. So now eka eva ayamakaraha pratate. This form, this shape, appears as one, maybe, or as one only. May I just ask you, so akaraha here refers to like Vijnanasya akara? Like, is a
Well, that's part of the question. Is it artasya or jnanasya akara? So since that question is about to be posed, maybe here we should not already anticipate it too much. Let's just say the form that appears in cognition. But now the question still can be asked, is that the form of the object or is it the form of the cognition?
Yeah, because like later on he discusses it in detail, and I just kind of got a bit confused.
Okay.
Implies
Maybe one thing before I forget it, before we go on, you translated atta as now here, I think. I would suggest that here now is not the best translation. Now is often quite appropriate for atta. Those are cases where atta has the meaning of anantarya. Atta shabda anantarya. This is very common, especially in narrative, but also in philosophical texts. For instance, as you may remember, the atta, which is the first word of the Brahma Sutras, but also several other sutra texts like the Vaisheshika Sutra, that atta is often said to be anantarya. Now, immediately after that, and this indicates actually that there was something directly preceding. For instance, in the case of Brahma Sutras, maybe the most common is to say that atta kind of alludes to Mimamsa, to the Purva Mimamsa, and now the Vedanta is to be honest, the Uttara Mimamsa. So sure, atta often can be translated as now, but the usage here, I think, is slightly different. Here, atta means something like or if. And this atta you will see being used when multiple possibilities have been mentioned, and then one or more have already been discussed, and we are turning to discuss the next one. That's exactly the situation that we have here. The speaker mentioned two possibilities, kim eka akaraha prakashate uta dvitayam. He discussed one, the second one, he did first, and then he says atta, and now he moves to the first one. Atta is something like if instead, or if. Or if instead, maybe here if instead fits a little bit better qua English than or if. If instead, or if instead then, now I'm using three words to translate the two-syllable word atta, but anyway, atta somehow has roughly this feeling, I think. If instead then, since the dvitiya possibility, well, the dvitiya possibility would put an end to vichara, but actually the dvitiya possibility is absurd. If instead then, evayam akarha pratate. This, now why does he use the pronoun I am here? This akara appears as only one. This akara in the sense of the akara that we are talking about, the akara in or of a cognition, a perceptual cognition, pratyaksha vijnana. Tarhi, sorry, I forgot which point you reached in your translation. I think maybe you had
Oh, sorry, I stopped in the first sentence. Yeah, so tarhi which I have, and there is the occasion or the possibility to think about this. Maybe.
Yeah, let me also point out here that tarhi, this should help us to understand that atta does not mean now. Actually, tarhi is pointing to the fact that atta is something like yaditu, if, however. And then you will, if you read it this way, if you understand that atta in these contexts is more or less exchangeable with something like yaditu, then the tarhi becomes completely natural as picking up that yadi. If then in that case, asti, we note the word order, verb put before the subject. This is rather emphatic, emphasizing the verb. Then there is indeed. In the other case, kim vicharyate, which is the same as vicharavasaro nasti, right? But in this case, then asti vicharavasara. There is really an occasion for vichara. In other words, it is appropriate now that we consider further. There's something further to examine. What is there to examine further? Kasya ayam akara.
Whose shape is this?
Right. Whose shape,
Right.
form, or appearance or something is this? Mhm.
Kimarthasya and kim jnanasya iti. Kimarthasya is of the, I mean, maybe these two kim imply whether of the meaning or of the of knowledge.
Yeah, that could at least fit indeed. My feeling though is that just with Kim, that's not what it means, but I would say that Kim, he could have, of course, here put things differently. He could have said Kim artasya, Kim jnanasya va, or he could have said Kim artasya uta jnanasya. Those are both be perfectly fine formulations, but he just chose a different one, which also works. Kim artasya, kim jnanasya. I feel this as just, is it the objects? Is it cognitions? So I read both. I feel both kims as simply being question mark kims. And of course, akaraha is to be supplied. Kim artasya akaraha, or kim artasya ayam akaraha. Kim jnanasya akaraha. And again, a va would be very natural, but after all, it's not necessary. In English too, I would have the option of saying, is it the objects or the cognitions? But it's also perfectly okay to say in English, to put it as two questions. Is it the objects? Is it the cognitions? Both are perfectly okay. All right. Iti. And then I think you had read also the following in Sanskrit, so you could translate it perhaps.
Taivam vicharyamana yadi arthasyeti sthasyati tad bhavanto jeshyan. So, and maybe it's again and if. So yeah, there is yadi. So sa vicharyamana akaraha. Evam vicharyamana akaraha. The evam refers to, okay, just the word order seems a bit difficult, but the concept is it, and maybe it's a article for akara. So this form thought of thus, if it is of the meaning, then I'm supplying then, but if it is a meaning, iti would be the then sthasyati. Or if it is said maybe to be of the meaning, it will stand, it will stay. Therefore, so maybe in such an instance, you will win. Although point is, if this form is thought to be of the meaning, therefore you will win. And then jnanakara ketu. In case, or on the other hand, in case of the form being of knowledge, vayam jishyamaha, we will win.
Yeah, okay. Something about the structure, it seemed to me that you took it in a way a little bit different. But let me see. Sachavam vicharimana akaraha yadi artasya iti stasiti tadbhavantu cheshamti. Somehow you seem to take the stasyati or iti stasyati as maybe you supplied a then, and then you took the tat following that as therefore. But rather, tat is the one that picks up yadi. Yadi can be picked up with tarhi, as we just discussed. It can also be picked up with tada, and it can also be picked up with tat. All three, I think are rather common. Here, it is the tat which is picking up the yadi. So stasati is still belonging to the conditional sentence. So I try a translation, and cha, this akara, sa akara, evam vicharyam